In a small village where whispers travel faster than the wind, an elderly couple's quiet life turns into a battleground of love, loyalty, and faith. But when a miracle child arrives to upend their world, the village erupts in envy and suspicion. Will their unwavering bond withstand the storm, or will the forces of tradition and greed tear them apart? For 35 years, Mr. Daniel and his wife Agnes shared a love so strong it defied the sorrow of childlessness. Just when their prayers were answered with a miracle child, the whispers of envy and betrayal in their village threatened to shatter their joy. How far can love and faith carry them when the world seems determined to take everything away? Mr. Daniel was a kind man. At 60 years old, his silver hair shone in the sun and his deep voice carried with them. His wife, Mrs. Agnes, was 50. She was gentle and loving with a warm smile that could light up a room. For 35 years they lived together as husband and wife. Their only sadness was that they had no children. They had tried everything: doctors, able medicines, prayers, and fasting, but no child came. As the years went by, they learned to accept their fate. When Mr. Daniel retired, they moved back to their village, hoping for peace. But instead of peace, they found trouble. In the village, having children was a big deal. Children were seen as a blessing, and they inherited the family's land. Some of the elders mocked Mr. Daniel and Mrs. Agnes. They said, "What will you do with all your land? You have no children to leave it to. It should go to those of us who do." The words had, but Mr. Daniel and Mrs. Agnes tried to ignore them. However, the pressure became too much. One day, Mrs. Agnes sat her husband down. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling, "I can't take this anymore. The people are saying we are useless. They want to take everything we've worked for. I think it's time for you to marry another wife." Mr. Daniel's eyes widened. "What are you saying, Agnes? You are my wife. I don't need another woman." Tears filled Mrs. Agnes's eyes. "This is not about me. It's about you. You need someone who can give you a child. Please, do this for me, for us." Mr. Daniel shook his head. For weeks he refused. But Mrs. Agnes didn't give up. She begged him every day until, finally, he agreed. It was not an easy decision, but he loved his wife and wanted to ease her pain. They found a young lady named Rose. She was beautiful, with smooth skin and bright eyes. She came from a poor family and agreed to marry Mr. Daniel. The village was buzzing with excitement. People whispered, "At last, Mr. Daniel will have a child." At first, everything seemed fine. Rose was cheerful and polite. But as the months went by, her attitude changed. One evening, she told Mr. Daniel, "I cannot live without old woman. She's always watching me. You need to send her away." Mr. Daniel found. "Agnes is my wife. She has been with me for 35 years. I cannot send her away." Rose crossed her arms. "If you want me to stay, she must go. Choose one of us." Mr. Daniel's heart was heavy. He tried to reason with Rose, but she wouldn't listen. Eventually, under pressure, he asked Mrs. Agnes to live. She had streamed down her face as she packed her things and moved to her brother's house. Months later, Rose became pregnant. Mr. Daniel was happy, but still missed his first wife. Then, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Agnes fell ill. Her brother rushed hard to the hospital. After running some tests, the doctor came back with surprising news. "Congratulations, Mrs. Agnes," the doctor said. "You're pregnant." Mrs. Agnes couldn't believe it. After all these years, she was finally carrying a child. She sent word to Mr. Daniel, who was overjoyed. But their happiness was short-lived. Rose, in her carelessness, lost her baby. Devastated, she packed her things and demanded a divorce. "I don't want to stay here anymore," she said coldly. "This marriage is over." Mr. Daniel didn't stop her. He realized his mistake. Without wasting time, he went to Mrs. Agnes. She was still recovering at her brother's house when he arrived. "Agnes," he said, kneeling before her, "please forgive me. I made a terrible mistake. Come back home. Let's start afresh." Tears filled Mrs. Agnes's eyes. She saw the regret in her husband's face and knew he meant every word. Slowly, she nodded. Together they returned home, ready to face whatever challenges life would bring this time as a united couple. Months passed, and Mrs. Agnes' pregnancy progressed smoothly. The news of her condition spread through the village like wildfire. Those who had mocked them now whispered in awe. "God has blessed them after all," they said. Mr. Daniel's joy knew no bounds. He walked tirelessly, tending to their farm and making the home comfortable for his wife. He stayed by her side during every doctor's visit, listening carefully to the advice and instructions. But the road was not without challenges. Some villagers, especially the elders who had had their land, were not pleased with the turn of events. One day, Mr. Daniel received a message. The village council wanted to meet him. "Daniel," one elder began when he arrived, "you are an old man. Even if this child is born, how will you raise them? Perhaps it's time to distribute your land among those who can use it better." Mr. Daniel's heart burned with anger, but he remained calm. "The land belongs to my family," he said. "Family. I will not give it away. My child will inherit it when the time comes." The elders grumbled but could do nothing. Mr. Daniel returned home, determined to protect what was his. As the month turned to weeks, the day of delivery finally came. It was a difficult labor, and Mrs. Agnes was exhausted. Mr. Daniel stayed outside the room pacing and praying. After hours of waiting, the cry of a baby filled the air. The midwife emerged with a broad smile. "It's a boy," she announced. Tears streamed down Mr. Daniel's face as he held his son for the first time. "Thank you, God," he whispered. He named the child Emmanuel, meaning God is with us. The birth of Emmanuel brought new hope and joy into their lives, but not everyone was happy. Jealousy and bitterness still lingered among some villagers, setting the stage for more challenges ahead. Emmanuel's arrival brought a new energy to the household. His cries filled the air at dawn, and his laughter was a melody that brightened their days. Mr. Daniel and Mrs. Agnes were determined to give their son the best life possible. Every day, Mr. Daniel walked the fields, planting crops and tending to the livestock. Mrs. Agnes, though still recovering, dedicated herself to caring for Emmanuel. But trouble was brewing in the village. The elders who had once marked Mr. Daniel's childless state now grew bitter with envy. Emmanuel's birth was seen as a symbol of resilience, and it angered those who had hoped to take over the family's land. Whispers spread through the village like wildfire. "How do we know that boy is truly his?" one elder said during a council meeting. "They waited this long to have a child. It's suspicious." Another elder nodded. "We must act fast before they secure the land for good. If we let them, that boy will grow up and claim everything." One evening, as Mr. Daniel was returning from the farm, he noticed two men standing near his property. They were elders from the village council. When they saw him, they cleared their throats and approached him with fixed smiles. "Daniel," one of them said, "we've been talking about the future of the village. We think it's best if you sell a portion of your land. After all, you have a child now, but raising him will take resources." Mr. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Thank you for your concern, but my land is not for sale." The men exchanged glances, their smiles fading. "Think about it, Daniel," the other man said. "The village's progress depends on people like you being generous." Mr. Daniel stood firm. "I have thought about it. My answer is final." As the men left, their expressions darkened. That night, Mr. Daniel told Mrs. Agnes about the encounter. She held Emmanuel close and whispered, "We must be careful. They won't stop here." True to her words, the elders began spreading rumors. They claimed that Emmanuel was not Mr. Daniel's biological son. Some villagers believed the lies while others defended the family. The tension in the village grew. One afternoon, while Mrs. Agnes was fetching water from the stream, she overheard two women gossiping. "Have you heard?" one woman said. "They said that Daniel's wife went to the city and paid a doctor to make her pregnant." Mrs. Agnes' hands trembled as she carried her water pot back home. She told Mr. Daniel everything she had heard. His jaw tightened and his fist clenched. I will not let them destroy our family, he said. The next morning, Mr. Daniel went to the village council. He stood tall and addressed the elders. I have heard the lies you've been spreading about my family, he began. You call yourselves leaders, yet you stoop to gossip and deceit. My son is my blood, and I will not let anyone question that. The council was silent. Some elders looked away, ashamed, while others glared at him defiantly. Mr. Daniel's patience snapped. Enough, he roared. I've tolerated your disrespect for too long. This is my family, my child, and my land. If any of you dare to challenge me again, you regret it. The men were taken aback by his outburst. They muttered among themselves, but eventually left their mission unaccomplished. Despite the confrontation, the situation in the village remained tense. Mr. Daniel decided it was time to take action. He visited the village chief, a wise and respected man named Agnes. Agnes, Mr. Daniel said, bowing respectfully. I need your help. The villagers are threatening my family. They questioned my son's legitimacy and seek to take my land. I cannot allow this to continue. The chief listened carefully. Daniel, he said, you are a good man, and I've known you for many years. Leave this matter to me. I will call a meeting and put an end to these foolish rumors. A few days later, the entire village gathered at the square. The chief addressed the crowd with authority. Enough is enough, Agnes declared. Mr. Daniel and his wife have done nothing wrong. Their child is a blessing, and anyone who speaks against them speaks against the gods who blessed this land. Let this be the end of the matter. If I hear of any further trouble, those responsible will face severe consequences. The crowd murmured in agreement, and the atmosphere slowly began to change. People started to approach Mr. Daniel with apologies, and the family was finally left in peace. As Emmanuel grew, he became a symbol of hope and resilience in the village. Mr. Daniel and Mrs. Agnes, the older than most parents, embraced their roles with grace and strength. They taught their son the values of kindness, courage, and fit, ensuring that he would grow up to be a man they could be proud of. But life in the village was never entirely free of challenges. The family would face more tests in the years to come, each one proving that love and determination could overcome even the greatest obstacles. The story conveys a moral lesson. Patience, faith, and perseverance can lead to blessings even in the face of adversity. Mr. Daniel and Mrs. Agnes teach us that love and loyalty are stronger than the trials of life, and that unity within a family can overcome external pressures. It also highlights the importance of standing up for one's dignity and trusting in divine timing even when others doubt or oppose you. Resilience in adversity, despite the challenges and rumors, the couple remains steadfast, showing the importance of standing strong in the face of difficulties. Love and loyalty, Mr. Daniel's unwavering love and loyalty to his wife, demonstrate the strength of true commitments in marriage. Standing for truth, the story highlights the importance of defending what is right even when facing opposition or societal pressures. Community and leadership, the intervention of Agnes, the village chief, underscores the value of wise leadership and the role it plays in resolving conflicts and fostering peace. The story of Mr. Daniel, Mrs. Agnes, and Emmanuel reminds us that love, perseverance, and faith can overcome even the greatest challenges and leave a lasting legacy of hope and inspiration.